You're listening to WCTN.
May we make a suggestion? Take your phone off the hook. Somebody might call during the next hour or so and interrupt your fun.
Get it. And now, $1 million.
Bigger guests, bigger audio. You're listening to the West Coast Truth with Russell Scott, Season 4.
Did you know there are some aspects of 9/11 even 9/11 truthers are afraid to discuss? Who was responsible and why? Calls from the planes were faked. No plane crashed in Shanksville. No Boeing 757 hit the Pentagon. Video fakery was used in New York, and the media was profoundly involved. 9/11 was a fabricated Hollywood-style event. The one conference that will rip the veil of secrecy. The one conference that dares to tell the truth. The Vancouver Hearings at the Denman Theatre, June 15th to 17th. Just Google 911vancouverhearings.com. Be there if you have the courage to learn truths others dare not speak. The Vancouver Hearings at the Denman Theatre, June 15th to 17th.
On tonight's program, writer and philosopher, Neil Kramer.
Neil Kramer, welcome to the West Coast Truth.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me here. It's good to be with you today.
Tell me about yourself and bring the audience up to speed. Who is Neil Kramer?
Neil Kramer is a philosopher, a writer, a teacher, and he involves himself largely in matters of metaphysics, mysticism, mystical traditions, control systems, liberation from control, self-empowerment, stuff like that. It's really my work, a blend of self-development, philosophy, and mystical truth. So that covers lots and lots of different topics. And most of what I do nowadays is really focused on empowering people to liberate themselves from any sort of control, whether that's globalist, New World Order type stuff, whether that's personal, domestic, entanglements, legal entanglements, psychic stuff, whatever. Most of my focus is spent on developing really that strength and that core that a lot of human beings have completely neglected to put any consciousness into, understandably to some extent, because the mainstream culture doesn't really acknowledge us as anything other than essentially sort of chemical machines. So I bring a little bit of a reframing of what it is to be a human being and what it means to be here in this very surreal and strange landscape of the 21st century, this industrial, military kind of bizarreness. Lots of people I speak to are interested in philosophy and consciousness. There's also a lot of fringe dwellers into UFOs, paranormal, crop circles, ultra-terrestrials, extraterrestrials, all kinds of different stuff. So my work, spanning as it does our sort of sacred knowledge from the ancient world, really there's no taboos in what I do. There's no areas that I won't go into. So most of the stuff in my book, The Unfoldment, is going to be quite a surprise to any mainstream readers. And they'll be like, holy cow, where's this guy going? It does go pretty deep. It is very dense, the text. It's very richly layered, if you like. So there's a top layer message, but there's also kind of a deeper significance to a lot of it. But it's really a multi-spectrum kind of discipline where you have to be a psychologist and a philosopher. You have to have some conspiracy research grounding. You have to understand some of our sacred texts of Christian and Muslim and Judaic and Hindu and Buddhist origin. You have to know a bit about all of these things to develop any sort of clear view of what is actually going on in our world today and what you can do about it. So, in a nutshell, that is what I concern myself with. So, the quick one is, what do you do? I write, and I am a philosopher. That's the short way of describing it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned New World Order, and it's my philosophy and the policy of this program to ask anyone who mentions that what that means.
The New World Order is the latest facade for the empire. And there is one empire, and it's been here for a long, long time, many, many millennia. And there is an unbroken lineage in recent times from the Egyptians to the Romans to the Britons to the Americans. That is the empire. What we call the New World Order, or the globalists or the elites, or whatever you want to frame it as, is really a kind of 20th century encapsulation of who appears to be administrating that empire at the moment. That's my vision of what that means. So we use words that we can all understand, but actually it is the old hierarchy, the old empire.
Now, you're admitting here that you need some primer material before you begin to open this, right?
Not necessarily. It is written from the perspective that I would like to think that anybody could pick this up and go with it, whoever they are, and whether they know a lot about esoteric matters or not. So as long as you can read, and as long as you can sit there long enough to focus on something, I think it's very approachable. And in fact, to some degree, I mean, anyone who's interested in esoteric matters is going to enjoy this book. There's no doubt about that. But to some degree, part of the juice for me is to say, well, what about a mainstream audience? Because it's very easy to ignore those people. But what about our friends and family and our brothers and sisters or whatever are out there who are a bit reticent to make contact with alternative type information? What about those people? So experimentally, part of this book, part of the project, if you like, is to say, well, any of those people, if they have got any faint inclination, any spark inside, should be able to pick this up and say, okay, well, this guy is not a dick. He is intelligent. He seems to mean it. That's the key thing. This guy actually means it. And I think when you see that, it's like going to a concert, even though you might not be massively into, like, say, the warm-up band, you know, the first act on. If they mean it, you think, yeah, that was good, because they mean it, and you think that was really good. And I think it's the same with anything, with art, with music, with lovemaking, with walking the dog, with hiking, mountaineering, whatever you're into, whatever you do. If you mean it, the actual doing of it becomes more imbued with meaning and consciousness. And I think that carries through in this book, that you can actually feel that. So some of the concepts, well, they might have to go away and think about that later, or they may be very unfamiliar with it. The tone of it actually gets the message across. So it's one of those things where I used to read German philosophy as a very young man, as a teenager, and some of it, particularly sort of Hegel in particular, and some other people as well, Schopenhauer, The Will to Power, that's Nietzsche, The Will to Power. The World as Will and Representation was a very dense read by Schopenhauer, very dense, and I kind of didn't actually understand everything the guy was saying at 19. You know, understandably, that's a forgivable thing, but I got the spirit of it, and I felt what he was saying, and I felt that there was something significant in there. And then years later, I would return to it and actually then completely conceive of everything that the guy meant, but it didn't detract from that initial experience, and only because I was entirely unfamiliar with philosophy and a lot of the concepts. So in another kind of way, I hope to achieve that, in that if anyone isn't used to a broad use of language, a deep use of language, don't let that put you off, because this book has some things that is the kind of material that kind of is relevant to all of us nowadays, particularly in a very strange world of shifts and transformations and transitions. And, people are very much in the position where they're losing faith in the old institutions and traditions and organizations. And they kind of like thinking, well, where do we go from here? Do we become right-wing patriots? Do we become left-wing hippie socialists? What the hell do we do? And
there's a lot of fear out there, Neil.
Yeah, there is a lot of fear. And I think that fear is quite natural and it's quite understandable, and there's nothing to be sort of ashamed of. It's like a natural response to uncertainty. And when we're uncertain of something, like, if you lose your job and your wife leaves you, or, you get an illness and you don't know what's around the corner, you don't know how you're going to make the rent or whatever, that is scary. And it's the same for anybody, wherever you are. If you're in Cambodia or if you're in Seattle, it doesn't really matter. It's the same human uncertainty of fear of the unknown. So one of the things that I do with this book is kind of make friends with the unknown and say, fundamentally, if you kind of zoom out of yourself for a minute and zoom out of just your perspective and achieve a slightly higher perspective, shall we say, that fear starts to recede a little bit. And you start to understand that the unknown is kind of part of the game of life. It's part of the spontaneity of it. And it isn't a bad thing. And in fact, most of what goes on is unknown. And we just sort of kid ourselves, really, that we know what we're doing and we know what's around the corner. We don't really. It's all unknown. And when you're sort of brutally honest looking at that issue, you start to, as I say, associate with the unknown and with change in a much more positive fashion.
This key to success stuff, it always comes down to the confidence and believing in yourself. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about Barry Manilow, who we both figured was relatively talentless, but believed in himself so much that he became attractive and became successful, right? Is it just that simple?
In a way, yes, it is just that simple. It is. It's saying, am I just a guy who's a bit crap and a bit average and not good looking and can't run very fast and isn't very strong and isn't very appealing to the opposite sex? Am I just that guy? Or could I be something unique and extraordinary and special and cool? Could I be that? And if you focus on that uniqueness and stop comparing yourself to other people and just say, well, let's deal with what we've got here. So if you're Barry Manilow, this is your hair, this is your nose, this is your piano playing skills, this is your voice, whatever. And you say, well, that's it. These are my cards. But let's make that absolutely unique. Let's make that, almost my special singular brand of extraordinariness. Let's do that. And then suddenly you start playing at a different level. You're not worried about you don't look like Brad Pitt or you can't sing like, Pavarotti or something. That's not relevant anymore. You're doing your own thing. So confidence, as anybody who, was had any kind of coolness at all at school will know, and I had a little bit of it, confidence and coolness is essentially just being comfortable doing your own thing. And when you really get to grips with that early on, you realize that from the age of like 14 to the age of 40, it doesn't really change that much. It's the same thing. So looking at matters of spirituality and consciousness and, extraterrestrials and ancient Earth origins and stuff, there's no taboos. You don't have to worry about what anyone's going to say, like, God, are you off your rocker? What you're talking about? It's okay when you talk about philosophy, but whenever you mention ETs, that worries me. Well, it worries people because they're afraid of being judged by their peers because they've been conditioned to basically do the same thing as everyone else. But as I say, when you're playing your own game, when you're ploughing your own furrow, as they say, all that changes. You're not bothered about that anymore. You just do what feels aligned with your truth, and you proceed down that path of discovery as far and as deeply as you can.
If one believes in extraterrestrials or UFOs, it is considered to perhaps be weird unless you write a book, and then you've legitimized it, and then people accept it as being totally mainstream.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you had a show and you've got you've been doing a show on, let's say, the natural world, on wildlife and lions and gazelles, zebras and stuff for 20 years, and then suddenly you do a show about UFOs, it makes people think, well, what's this guy doing? Because UFOs has to be either fringe material on these strange little television channels, or it's humorous, or it's fiction. And those are the narratives that are put forward in the mainstream to say it's fringe, it's fiction, or it's humorous. That's it. But to have somebody credible come forward, and thankfully we've got lots of these people in our world at the moment, and say, well, I know it sounds funny, but in this enormous universe, there are many, many different forms of life, many different orders of intelligence, and we're just one of them. And there's many, and they kind of interpenetrate each other, and they're not all zipping about in little spaceships. Like, it's a bit more sophisticated than that. Some of them move between dimensions, some of them move between densities, they oscillate, the form is different, the way they organize matter as plasma instead of, this kind of third density hard carbon, that works in a different way. They don't have a brain, they don't have fingers, they don't work like that. And our ancestors knew all about these life forms and communed with them and gave them different names and stuff. And it's really just nature. It's the natural world, but it's a vast spectrum of it that we sort of ignore. So if you think of it like a spectrum on a rainbow, we're in the green bit in the middle, and we completely disregard the red and the blue and the orange and the yellow and the violet. We pretend that doesn't exist because it's too far out of our awareness.
Are these colors realities, perceptions? What are the colors?
Well, in this particular case, I'm using it as an example to say, if you imagine that you only focus on one bandwidth, which is this particular oscillation of form, which we call the 3D world, which is cars and televisions and food blenders and kettles and human beings, that's one oscillation of matter. And we call that form, third density form, up, down, left, right. That's it. That's the 3D world. What I'm saying is that there is also a 4D and a 5D and a 6D and a 7D. And in those realms, everything works completely differently. The physics is totally different. And as quantum theorists are obviously positing, they're starting to touch the 4D and say, well, in the 4D realm, one object can be in two places at the same time. In fact, one object can travel from point A to point B without any movement in between. And so a lot of what we call the supranormal or the paranormal begins to say, well, it isn't really. It looks supernatural if you only perceive it from the 3D. But if you come out, go up a level into the 4D, it's quite normal because there's no need for form in the 4D. It doesn't work like that. You can zip about, change from one place to another very, very easily. So in my work, what I show is that a lot of our ancestors going back to this completely unknown Earth ancient world, which we know nothing at all about. We have a very thin and peculiar version of it in the mainstream history books, but the real ancient world we know next to nothing about. However, we do have some accounts from some of our shamanic and druidic indigenous peoples, particularly in Europe and Gaul and Britain, Albion as it was a little earlier. We do have accounts where people used this knowledge to actually do things. For example, when Caesar's Roman troops came to Britain, some of the Druids at the time, some of the British Druids set up force fields. And there's one account where a Roman legion went into a field, a valley, and a number of Druids sat there with their hands up, and the troops could not proceed. There was an invisible force field, just like some sort of Lord of the Rings, Tolkien movie. This was the real world not long ago. This was people who understood how to move energy from the 4D into the 3D and back again. It wasn't anything peculiar, but to us now, it looks like magic, it looks like fiction. And so some of the work that I get involved in is to say, well, guess what? The world is a bit bigger and a bit deeper and a bit more interesting than we've been led to believe. And there's an awful lot of factual evidence to back that up. You can do it through your own experiences. That's the most important way. But if you want a bit of abstract data to immediately back that up, a bit of information, well, there's plenty of it.
And let's talk about it after the break.
Sure.
We'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Neil Kramer.
Did you know there are some aspects of 9/11 even 9/11 truthers are afraid to discuss? Who was responsible and why? Calls from the planes were faked. No plane crashed in Shanksville. No Boeing 757 hit the Pentagon. Video fakery was used in New York, and the media was profoundly involved. 9/11 was a fabricated Hollywood-style event. The one conference that will rip the veil of secrecy. The one conference that dares to tell the truth. The Vancouver Hearings at the Denman Theatre, June 15th to 17th. Just Google 911vancouverhearings.com. Be there if you have the courage to learn truths others dare not speak. The Vancouver Hearings at the Denman Theatre, June 15th to 17th.
Are you living in pain or discomfort? Have you found that pharmaceuticals are doing more harm than good? MedPot Now provides an alternative solution to achieve a higher quality of life with the highest grade medical cannabis in the industry. All of our products are non-profit, chemical-free, and organically grown.
Nice.
Call 604-569-2119 or visit www.medpotnow.com. MedPot Now, the freedom to choose what works, is finally in your hands.
Sophisticated, aerodynamic, incredibly powerful, yet responsive lightweight handling, and with features others simply don't offer. Introducing the new Auric XL Platinum 9-pound upright. The power to go from zero to clean in minutes. Go online to buy or find an Auric dealer near you and find out how you can test drive the XL Platinum risk-free for 30 days.
We're back with Neil Kramer. Is the human race being suppressed?
Yes. Next question. I'll tell you a really short answer, and we can unpack this if you want to.
We'll unfold it.
Very good, very good. Some entities need to nourish themselves on other entities. For example, a whale needs to eat like plankton to nourish itself, to sustain its life, right? A caterpillar needs to eat aphids and leaves and so on to sustain its life, okay? There are other types of being, other orders of intelligence in this universe that sustain their life on consciousness, but only a certain type of consciousness, which is a very low-level consciousness, which we might call ignorance or anxiety or depression or fear even. And that is a fuel source. That is a fuel source. And so to some extent, if you find yourself in a position where you have transcended the need to have a form, but you've taken, let's say, a negative path to get there, you can't proceed beyond a certain point. You can't self-sustain yourself. So what you have to do is you have to create a situation where you have sustainable, renewing energy. And that takes the form of billions of ignorant human beings and other life as well, but mainly human consciousness. And I feel, having looked at this personally and having read this, of course, in some of the older texts that we have available to us, that this is a very old idea and it's something that's been very well observed. But where people went wrong was that they think it's to do with gold or oil or labor or power or money or something like that. And it's nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. Those are just smoke screens. What it's really about is maintaining a certain type of mindset that can be used just like we use sunlight. You know, if you imagine going back 500 years and saying to people, see this light in the air, see that big yellow thing in the sky, we can use that for power. We can use that to power a whole city. They'd think you were crazy. They think, well, there's nothing there though. There's no substance. What you're talking about. And so in the same way that somebody 500 years ago might have struggled to see how sunlight could be used to power something, to sustain something, it's a bit like that. We're talking about another order of energetic configuration, like solar or hydro, or wind power or whatever. I'm saying that consciousness is another fuel source. And in order for it to be useful, it has to be at a certain oscillation. So having lovely, bright, bouncy, happy, joyful, blissed out people is no good at all. Useless, really, really poor. What you need is that incredible tension. And you know what it's like if you've ever been in a situation where you're full of pent-up aggression and fear and loathing and anxiety. It's a very, very potentially powerful state, albeit at a very low resolution, shall we say. That is a fuel source, and that is why human beings are suppressed.
Then who are the suppressors?
Well, that's a very sophisticated investigation to answer that question, which we haven't massively got time for. But let's say that as you make investigations into Earth history, you realize that contrary to the official historical record, our ancestors weren't just running around with sticks and stones and being stupid and, you know, bashing each other over the head with clubs. It wasn't like that. We have had hugely more advanced populations and civilizations than what we have now, in my view. Many times over Earth's history, over human history. And the level of technology far exceeded the kind of crude metals and plastics that we have now. And it was very elegant technology, very sympathetic to the environment, very complementary to energy, i.e. there wasn't a massive gap between the technology and the energy that it was harnessing. They were very close to each other. Whereas if you think about a car, they're very far away from each other. To have millions of cars still running around on spontaneous combustion engines is bloody stupid. That's the kind of nonsense that, you know, we tell ourselves, and we know that they're trying to suppress various technologies. But my point is that they far exceeded that. And along the way, there have been many exchanges with other people in the system, other entities in the system, other humanoid forms in the system who have also a long and rich history in this very fascinating part of the galaxy. And really, to some extent, as you progress and as you ascend, you realize that it's not incredibly helpful to civilizations who are still developing to drop fantastic technology on them and to give them all this amazing stuff, because it spoils their development. It's like giving a kid, you know, a 1-year-old child, a top-end Apple Macintosh laptop. You know, they'd be like, well, what am I going to do? Chew it? You know, I don't know what to do with this technology. There's no point, because that consciousness hasn't reached a level of complexity where it can properly utilize it. So you have this thing, just like Gene Roddenberry suggested, where you don't mess around with other races. You don't dip your nose in unless it's absolutely earth-shatteringly necessary. You let people get on with it, and you let their consciousness develop to a certain maturity before it would even be appropriate to have any communication with them. Okay? Now, in my model of the universe, and this is where we get to the answer, there are 7 fundamental densities of being, 7 realms, you might say, 7 dimensions, and we're in the 3rd one. And as you progress up, your consciousness has to reach a certain level of refinement. And you could think of it like it has to become very, very high resolution, just like in the old days. You know, you got a rubbish TV with huge pixels on it. It was very low res, and now you get these fabulous big, you know, 1080p high def screens, and you think, wow, the resolution is so high now. And so it is in a way with consciousness, that you can't pop into the next dimension with a low res consciousness. It can't happen physically. It cannot happen. So you have to raise it to a certain level to get up there. Now, as many mystics have looked at over the millennia, including particularly the Gnostics and the Sufis, they said that there are some entities in a fourth dimensional realm who are negative, and they've got there through what we would call misdeed or evil or wrongness. And that's the last place you can go with that route, with that mentality. You cannot proceed any further from the 4D on a negative path. So if you've got there by being a sorcerer, an evil sorcerer, a black magician, or a tyrant, or a Hitler, or a Mao, or a whatever, a Bush, or a Blair, let's keep it fair. If you've got there by that method, and you've been in these kind of distorted secret societies, because there are good secret societies as well, then great, you're going to have this tremendous power. You're going to look pretty invulnerable and pretty impressive to the common man who's still pissing about in his car and, you know, paying into his 401k and wondering what's going to happen next month. You're going to look quite impressive compared to that, because you can do things that other men can't do. And you're not willingly going to want to retreat from that position so you can forego some of those powers just to go back to a positive path of equilibrium. You're not going to want to do that. And the universe builds in this system of what we call entropy to say, well, just to make this whole thing work well, you can't stay in the 4D indefinitely, because otherwise entities would just stay there forever. You can't do that. So the universe has this entropy where everything in the 1, 2, 3, and 4D moves to its end. It moves always towards its own dissolution, its own diffusement. And so it is with these beings. So to sustain themselves, they need a renewable fuel source. And some of those beings, you say, well, who are they? You know, we'd like to think, well, it's the Orions, it's the Reptilians, it's the negative Arcturians, it's the Aldebarans, it's the Andromedans, it's the Pleiadians. I think that's a very understandable question, but I think it's also a very gross question as well, because it's like saying, who on earth is responsible for all the badness? You can't really point your finger at an ethnicity or a race or a political persuasion. It doesn't work like that. It's not quite as simple as that. Similarly, it's not one master race that's responsible for this. It's a whole way of being that is in error. And you could say, well, there are certainly some, we have many accounts of reptilian influence in that. That doesn't mean they're bad. It means that they have a gravitation towards shadow, towards the negative. And so do many wonderful human beings as well. Like many of our best musicians and artists have a gravitation towards the shadow. And without that, we wouldn't have had this fabulous music and art that they produced in that self-destructive path. So it isn't a bad thing as such. From a very high level, it's not bad, but it is destructive. It is destructive. So you have to take a very, very supremely balanced view and say, well, I can understand why they would do that then. So just like, a sick man would need to keep taking his methadone on his heroin withdrawal so he doesn't go completely off his trolley. So these entities have to maintain some kind of sustenance, and it's kind of not personal. It's not like this singling out human beings to say, yeah, let's pick on these guys, these weak, pathetic humans. Let's pick on them. It could be anyone, anywhere in the universe. Here, it just happens to be us. And so on a personal level, it feels personal. If somebody's smashing you in the teeth, it feels pretty personal. But if you get out of yourself and look at it from a higher perspective, it's not really very personal. Just like it isn't personal to the gazelle who is chased down by a cheetah on the plains of Africa. It's not singling out that. It's just that's what it has to do to live. And it's kind of like that. So if you want names and dates and people and places and faces and colours and textures, you can go and find them, and you can fill your laptop with those images, and you can talk about it all night and write 10 books on it. But really, that's not the point, because you're just describing some of the colours. You're not really getting to the root of it. The root of it is, how do we go through this natural ascension process without drifting into negativity? How do we do that? So these entities almost serve as markers to say, well, don't do it that way. So if you see these demonic human beings on the planet making such a mess of everything, don't do it that way. That sucks. That isn't a good way to go forward. And in fact, we can almost have a little bit of pity for how wrong they are and how pathetic they are, and what a ridiculous way of deporting one's consciousness it is to be Tony Blair or George Bush, let's say, as very, very stark examples. What a ridiculous way to conduct yourself as a human being. It's not very integral. It's not a very honorable way of being, is it? I wouldn't be very proud of that.
Well, in biology, they have negative indicators. So, for example, the blue jay is a negative indicator. If you see far too many of them in an area, you know that the environment there is out of whack in some way. George Bush, Tony Blair, these are also indicators that the system that we're in is out of whack.
It is, and it almost shows you to say, oh, right, oh, crikey, it's gone off course, is it right? We better knuckle down then and do something about it. So when you're in the thick of the drama, if you believed that you only had 90 years and that was it, and everything else was just gone then it would be quite distressing to think, well, what a mess. This could be such a paradise planet. And it really is already, but we're just not operating it very well. What a shame. What a disaster. Let's wake everyone up and all hold hands under the rainbow. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Well, it might be, and it might take a long time to get there. But what's fundamentally occurring right now is that this shadow, this darkness that's fallen upon our planet, and periodically does exactly that over and over, is almost there as a growth accelerator to say, right, you're not going to have any option now except to focus on what this problem is, because it's directly related to you, and it's directly related to what you can do as human consciousness on your path of growth. You can't ignore it when it's squashing you right in the face.
Stress drives change.
Yeah, it does. Stress makes people snap at some point. And when you snap, you either go and, pull the covers over your head and just think, right, that's it, I'm out of here. Take some pills, kill yourself, whatever, which is fine, completely legitimate response, I think, in some ways to the world, but not a fantastic way forward, because guess what? You just get rebooted and have to do it all over again. So no point in doing that. You can't really check out. So when you feel that stress, something to do with your job or your relationships or your finances or the political environment that you find yourself in, whatever it is, whatever form it takes, and it can be very practical and mundane, or it can be very highfalutin, it doesn't really matter. But when that stress reaches a certain point, it compels you to do something, to actually embrace this life and say, right, I'm actually going to get involved in this. I am going to commit myself to this bizarre adventure and get right into the thick of it and face this thing, because I've had enough. I'm not existing in that cynical chain of reward and punishment, of good and bad, of today's okay, tomorrow's shit. I can't do that roller coaster anymore because it's not true. So I'm going to find out what is true, and I'm going to go right into the heart of it. And stress and anxiety and shadow make you do that. I mean, you can deny it a million times, but eventually you'll have to do it. Maybe not even this lifetime, but eventually you will have to do it. So I think it's a good thing.
Good stuff. We'll be back after the break with Neil Kramer.
You're listening to The West Coast Truth with your host, Russell Scott.
Hi.
I can save you 15% today if you open up a charge card account with us.
Identity thieves never stop coming up with ways to steal from you. They can open up an account in your name and go on a serious spending spree.
Do you have cufflinks? Mm-hmm. Gold ones?
Not on our watch. We're LifeLock. Go to lifelock.com and learn how our patented billion-point database can help protect you. Call 1-800-LifeLock today. LifeLock. Relentlessly protecting your identity.
Experience instant relief with the UN Method. The UN Method is an innovative hands-off energetic technique that blends ancient Chinese temple healing and quantum biophysics with Western alternative modalities. Learn how to access the creative solutions provided by your intuition. For more information on upcoming classes, call Colette Stefan at 1306-584-9135 or visit www.crystallinevision.com.
I'm selling the book Maximize Immunity by Bruno Combi. Maximize Immunity can change your life. It can possibly even save your life. If you have AIDS or cancer, stop what you're doing right now. Get this book, Maximize Immunity, and learn how to maximize your immunity and unleash your body's best defense against illness. Your body can heal itself. Heal your body through the magic of food. Maximize Your Immunity, written by Bruno Combi, can save your life. I'm selling it for $20, free shipping and handling anywhere in North America. Just send an email to editor.westcoasttruth@hotmail.com and put Maximize Immunity in the subject title.
Can people ever be happy?
Not relevant, I don't think.
No, good and evil, happiness, not happiness, they don't matter?
No, there is no good, there's no evil, happiness, irrelevant. I think when you are doing what you're here to do, which is grow and witness and unfold and be true, happiness is always right there with you all the time, and it's always just like at arm's length. It's just right there near you, and you can welcome it into your life. And sometimes you're too busy to be happy, and you think, well, that's very nice, I'll come back to you later on, that's cool, but just go away for a minute because I'm busy now. Happiness is not any sort of destination, it's a byproduct of function. So when you're doing your do, when you're doing the juju, as I like to say, then happiness is there. You know, it's brilliant, it's nights out with your friends, it's fantastic conversations, it's inner contentment, it's tranquility, the kind of serenity that only comes about from your own realization and your own attainments and those little epiphanies when you figure stuff out about life. That's the deep happiness. That's the real thing. The rest of it, the laughs and the jokes and the stuff, is wonderful, and it's part of the normal life, like sunlight or like the ocean. It's just there. It's there all the time. Can human beings be happy? Can human beings breathe? It's the same question to me. It's like, well, yes, it's there all the time. To pursue it, though, as anyone who's ever tried to do it, is very silly. It's like trying to pursue breathing. You don't really ever get there because every time you focus on it, it stops. And every time you try and make it naturally happen, it becomes very mechanical and strained. You just don't even focus on it. You leave it to happen all of its own accord. Now, if that's chronically never happening to somebody, they're never happy, then that is life's way of saying to you, as is depression, which is, let's say the more chronic version of that, to say, you're off course, baby. You are off course. And just so you don't forget that, we're going to pull out the rug of light and you're just going to be in gloom all the time. And that is just radar. That's your psychic compass saying, no, you're going in the wrong direction. That's all that is.
Gosh, that seems bloody obvious when you put it that way, but people probably don't follow that instinct.
They don't. They go and take pills and stuff, which masks it and creates this very, very luscious fog. And I know what that feels like. I've been at both ends of that. I've been right at the bottom. I've been right at the top. I've been medicated, non-medicated, naturally, synthetically. I know what all that stuff feels like. I know what that is about, and I know why it happens. It's not any way forward, though. It's not going to the root of these things. It's just mitigating the symptoms of it. So it's saying, well, take this pill, and then you can get up tomorrow, get in the car, and go and sit in the office. That's what that's for, so you can be a productive member of society. But as my friend said to me 20 years ago, get Plato, not Prozac.
You like Plato?
He's okay. He's all right. He's a bit dry for my tastes, but I like the Germans to be honest with you. But
right, they're not dry at all.
No, they're not. No, they're absolutely. What, Nietzsche? Dry? Are you kidding me? No, it's like Bruce Lee. He's unbelievable. But no, I think that the lesson in it is to say you can pretend as much as you like that the TV and the newspapers and the magazines and the doctors and the educational institutions know what's going on, but they don't really know what's going on. Nobody does. And fundamentally, you have to kind of stand there one day and say, you know what, nobody knows what on earth is going on here. Nobody. And we pretend and we pretend and we document it and we sketch it out and we draw things, but we don't really know. And as soon as you realize that, the truth of that, then suddenly you take on this incredible ownership of what's true for yourself, right for you. No one else has any part of that. They can share stuff with you, as you do with your show and other guys like you. They share information, they share data, they share perspectives. But you then have to put that down and go, well, that was really interesting what this guy said, Russell, this other guy, Kramer. We'll put that down, and now I'll go and have a contemplate about that over the coming weeks. And that eventually either sinks in or just flushes through the system and gets excreted out, doesn't it? And it's the same with everything. And I think that is part of the journey on Earth, to say, at some point you will realize that nobody on the face of this planet knows exactly what's going on. Some people have got some good ideas, and some people have found some very, very credible information, but it's kind of not the point. The point is to determine what's true for you as you go along with absolute integrity and complete honor, not anyone else's honor, your own personal honor about what you know is right. That's the game. It's to cultivate your consciousness to a very, very, very high level. So you reach a point where at one of your exits, you can say, right, I'm not going back in there again. That was cool and very interesting, but I'm not going to go back again. I'm now at a state where I can go into this fourth density, this fourth realm, and go there to a completely new landscape, completely new terrain. And that's part of the natural journey. We've just not talked about it for a long time, but that is a very well understood mystical journey.
You've heard the phrase waking up. You've heard this one. It's common now. People are waking up. What does that mean to you?
There's a temptation when you find yourself becoming more conscious to go around shaking everyone else and saying, you know what, I've reached a threshold of consciousness where I now realize how wonderful and interesting and deep and scary and odd life is.
It's like a born-again Christian. They go around and pontificating it all day. Yeah.
It's like anybody. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses. It's like anybody. They go around and say, hey, you should be doing this too. And not only should you be doing it, but you should be doing it the way I did it. That's what you should be doing. You should be doing this because this is the way, this is the path, this is the Savior, this is the salvation. This is it, baby. This is the way. Now, anytime anyone ever says that, you know, if you're being kind to them, that they're misguided, right? They might have really good intentions and be a super guy or a super woman, and they're not a bad person in any way, really, but they're misguided, because if there is a divine emanation in this universe, which I believe there is, and that belief slowly has become more and more a faith, and that faith has slowly more and more become a knowing. So it's a personal encounter with the divine. It's not just data. That's just nowhere near good enough. You have to actually go there. As you feel this divine emanation in the universe from source, and it emanates this huge creation out into the void, you start to realize that the joy of the journey is to do it all by yourself, to go your own way. And so the last thing, let's call him God for the moment, the last thing that God wants is for everybody to just do what each other's doing, and to say, oh, it's this super guy who came down once called Jesus, this really diamond geezer, came down and said, hey, you know what? We're all kind of God in ourselves, and we can all get back by approaching this divinity within ourselves, and we can do things a totally different way, and it really is totally awesome. And so they thought, God, this is kind of creating problems, the Jews and the Romans at the time. So they thought, I know, we'll kill him, and then we'll elevate him to such a ridiculous extent that will there do away with any further troublesome avatars who come back with this knowledge. So we'll prescribe the knowledge, we'll codify it and say, well, it has to be Jesus, it has to be this book that was written in the 17th century, it has to be this worship form, and you have to do these things. And in fact, we'll even put these commandments down, and if you don't do that, you're cursed for all eternity. And I think anybody, I'm afraid to say, who's taken in by that is not taking their own divine path seriously enough, because it's very silly, and it's done a lot of damage as well, and a lot of people have lost their lives with that kind of nonsense. But it also means, philosophically speaking, you're not taking yourself very seriously if you do that nonsense. It means that you are passing over your control to someone else, saying, well, I know there's some sort of spiritual thing going on, but I haven't got a clue, to be honest, what it is. So what I'll do is I'll go and become a Christian or a Mormon or a Baptist or a Presbyterian or a Methodist. That seems kind of the thing to do. Oh, and handy, very handy, my parents were Methodists as well, so I'll just follow in their footsteps and go and have this very, very lame experience.
Well, you've outsourced this part of your brain.
Yeah, you outsource it, and it's a disavowal of your own divinity. Not only is it disrespectful to the Creator, but it's also a disavowal of your own sacredness to say, hang on a second, you've got your own special magic inside for that. You've got your own singular journey. You've got your own personal phone line to the Creator, to the divine, and you're not using any of that stuff. You're not doing it. You're just leaving it in the wardrobe, are you? And you're going down to the church and just nodding your head and singing a fairy tale. That's not a very respectful way of being. It doesn't have a lot of integrity for me, that. Now, it doesn't mean that those people are bad. It means that they are going down the wrong path. It means that they're going somewhere that is far from the divine. It's becoming distorted. They're so far out. So truth is pure and clear. Distortions, they start to get weird. They start to get confusing. And I think you have to look at those people and say, well, maybe that's exactly what you need to map the sort of optimal negative polarity of your own existence, to say, I knew there was something spiritual going on, and I thought it was this particular form of worship. And I'm not picking on anyone in particular. It could be anything, really. Even Hinduism and Buddhism are very bizarre ways of doing it, in my view, although they have a lot more practical advice and a lot more philosophical aptitude than the Abrahamic religions. Any prescribed orthodox religion, particularly with a very, very singular deity, is usually just a confusion of something purer. And if you go back to the origins of those religions, they didn't just spring up out of nowhere. It wasn't like the Creator said, right, put a blank book with blank pages on this pedestal here in this holy room with just pure blank pages in, and I will beam in the text of exactly what you're supposed to do, right? That's what we'll do, and that'll make it nice and easy for everyone, okay? And so they put the blank book there, God beams the text in, and there we've got it. Now, if that was the case, I'd be in church today, right? But it isn't the case. It really is not the case, and everybody knows that. But the question is, well, if it isn't, what do we do then? Because that means that we have to do it for ourselves. We have to go on this big, risky, adventure, like a little hobbit, wandering out of the safe comfort of the village and going into these completely unknown inner landscapes and outer landscapes. They don't want to do that, so they will stick with what's comfortable.
Did you say the Bible was written in the 17th century?
It's basically to do with King James, and it's basically to do with arranging a collection of texts to say this now constitutes the canonical Gospels. And as has been proven since that time, even in the last 300-400 years, what's been left out of the Bible, such as some of the Gnostic tractates, 52 of them found in Egypt in 1945, is really, really interesting, and you can understand why they've left it out. And fundamentally, I've never ever heard a strong argument against the idea that the Bible isn't a very politically motivated book. It isn't the Word of God. I think we know that. But you have to assume it's the Word of God if you're going to be a sincere Christian worshipper. And I do indeed respect people who do that. But you have to take it on faith that that's the Word of God. If you don't, the whole thing collapses. So I understand why people have to do that.
So the Bible is like a Reader's Digest.
Very, very moral allegory. There are some esoteric meanings. There can be some interesting things that can be decoded from it. But if you took a well-meaning, open-minded Christian man or woman and spent a year with them and walked through the origins of that book, where it came from, who wrote it, where did their ideas come from, where did they travel from, what were those birth dates based on, what were those rituals and celebrations based on, you go on this epic journey through European paganism and through Mithraism and through Druidic teachings and even, dare I say, through Atlantean teachings to stretch back way, way, way into the mists of time, and you realize that it isn't a Christian-owned story at all, not in the very slightest sense. But if you do that, your whole social and religious framework collapses, and you have to start from scratch. Now, I know people who've done that, and they're some of the most awesome human beings I've ever met in my life, because that takes courage to do that. And the very heartening thing about it is, and this is why I'm happy to, especially in America, speak a little bit controversially about these things, because I know there's a lot of Christians here. They remain, those people who've rejected it and said this isn't right, the most spiritual people I've ever met. They haven't ditched it and said this is nonsense, now I'm an atheist. Not at all, quite the reverse. They have taken their spiritual journey further and deeper, but they've made it their own and said, right, okay, there's some things in the Bible that are useful, no doubt about it. There are some pastors and ministers and priests and what have you who are good people who talk wisdom and hold communities together and take people in very challenging situations and bring them a lot of peace and a lot of sense. That is okay. That's what communities used to do all the time, with or without church. But the actual journey of the spiritual student, of awakening, of consciousness, the metaphysical underpinnings of religion are completely and totally absent from the churches and the synagogues and the mosques. They're not there anymore at all. So if you really give a shit about it, you have to take your journey inside yourself and go with it. It's not going to be found in your churches. And I know people who've done that, and I've known people who've done that for 20, 30 years now. And they are phenomenal human beings, because once you do that, you completely take ownership of your own spiritual journey, which takes guts.
We'll be back after this last break with today's guest, Neil Kramer.
On the next episode of The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott.
This is an American operation, and my book is called...
The Pentagon was occupied by Zionists. It's well demonstrated.
I'm sure.
It's well demonstrated. And also, Webster... Can I make one point? It's not baloney, because I have to ask you, how many Middle Eastern countries did the U.S. invade and intervene in overtly with its military in the Cold War? How many? This is
not necessarily to help the Israelis at all. Let me repeat. My book is called 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA. And
sorry, Webster. Webster.
Please stop interrupting, guys. I'm sorry. Made in USA means not made in Saudi Arabia, not made in Pakistan, not made in the myth-drenched regions of Bora Bora or whatever it is, and also not made in Israel in the sense that it was a plan concocted by the Zionist conspiracy. The idea that Israel dominates every feature of U.S. life, down to the detail, is simply a grotesque distortion. It is scientifically and historically wrong.
The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott. Season 4. It's official. Green Construction has the lowest installation price on flooring in the Greater Vancouver area. Transform your home or office from only $1 per square foot. At Green Construction, we guarantee our workmanship for life, and you don't pay a dime until the job is complete. Call 604-345-7626. That's 604-345-7626. Green Construction. Going green has never been easier.
World Banking, World Fraud. A must-read for anyone with a bank account. From a struggling young life as an orphan to a corporate nightmare of fraud, John Cruz, in his new book, describes his exceptional rise in the banking world and documents the systematic fraud and money laundering he uncovers while inside. What is really done with your identity? World Banking, World Fraud. Available now at Amazon.com. Learn the truth.
We're back with Neil Kramer. Great show. Last segment you said anyone who has the path, that's misguided. Now on the cover of your book, The Unfoldment, it says the organic path to clarity, power, and transformation.
What a bloody charlatan. Who the hell wrote this? Yeah. I think what you have to be wary of is when somebody says, this is it, this is the way. And I think that is something to be cautious of. So when it's a very prescribed path with lots of rules and regulations, and you have to wear certain things and do certain things and not eat certain things, and I don't think the divine gives a toss what we look like, what we wear, where we put our genitals, what words come out of our mouths. It's just not interested. What the divine is interested in is how we grow, how we evolve, how true we are, and what we do in our life. And what we do in our life is always an expression of this growth and of this path forward. So what I'm trying to get to is to say, well, the path is always your own. And like the Zen teachers would used to say, and I have a very warm relationship with Zen still, because there wasn't really any doctrine in that, not as such. There were some guidelines that the Japanese took from the Chinese, and the Chinese took from the Indians, the Hindus. But essentially, the Zen master would always encourage the student to leave. And the concept of a successful student was one who went very deeply, very briefly with the teacher and then left. A bad student would be someone who was there year after year after year, 25 years later, still sweeping the yard and diligently praying and doing zazen, sitting meditation. Very nice, like the academic or the scholar, very nice, but actually you're missing the point because it's your own personal path. So if you get too wrapped up in the paraphernalia and the accoutrements of awakening, then you suddenly, ironically, lose sight of the whole thing. So this book is all about the path of one's own self. It's about your own path, and it's about the natural path, hence the word organic.
What is the unfoldment?
The unfoldment is aligning yourself with the universe. And that means, to some people, the process of awakening and enlightenment. To more practical-minded people, self-development, self-actualization, bettering yourself, becoming a better man, a better woman. To the more esoterically minded, it means ascendance, natural ascendance from a rock to a wolf to a man to the 4D to the 5D and so on and so forth. So if you ever feel that the routine has got you, the matrix has got you, that you are wandering around train tracks and not really conducting your own course, not really steering your own trajectory, then this book acknowledges that respectfully, because that's where we all start from to some extent, and offers ways out of that to say, you don't need to do that anymore. There's another way of doing it.
Provide some.
Let's take an example, emotions. Emotions are the most powerful thing that affects us every day. It affects what we do, what we listen to, what we eat, who we sleep with, what we wear, what we say, how we hold our bodies, everything, where we go on vacation, everything is dictated by the way you feel. And so in the book, this comes across quite powerfully to say, if your emotions are unknown to you and just this random, bizarre force of nature, you are going to interminably be caught in this roller coaster of having a good time, having a bad time, having a great day, having a terrible day, having a good relationship with a woman, having a terrible relationship with a woman, and never really getting anywhere. So I kind of go to the esoteric root of what emotion is, which is a kind of consciousness that we transduce, if you like, through our heart portal, which is a subtle energy, what the Hindus would call chakra in your body, to say, well, imagine that all this consciousness is coming through your body and you've got these 7 portals from the tip of your head to the base of your spine, and each particular portal is there to do a specific job, which is transmit and receive incoming energy of a certain frequency. And the one in the middle of the body, which if we kind of decoded its frequency to color would be green, is what we have associated with the heart. And it isn't really the heart. And if somebody had said to me 10 years ago, let's talk about the heart chakra, that's the point where I'd turn the interview off. What I'm talking about is something a bit more radical than that, which is a central portal in the body, which is kind of like your Wi-Fi. It's kind of like your wireless networking. And most people's is turned off to the extent that they can only receive, they can't transmit. So part of the work in the Unfoldment is to say, as you read through these things, these different chapters and sections, you'll start to get an idea that most of what you do is based on a feeling. And we tend to say, well, we've got reason, which is the reliable way, and a feeling, which is a bit fluffy and feminine and unreliable. Not at all. Feeling is fundamentally why men go to war, why women have babies. You know, the most fundamental things you can do to live and to die are dictated by these feelings. So we need to be damn sure what they are. And I show in this book that all of it is consciousness, and we have just categorized it into different parts of the body. So the consciousness at the lower part of the body, we all know what that makes us go around doing, right? The consciousness at the top of the body is what we've come to
same thing
sanctify, yeah, and we know what that does. And it makes us into scholars and academics and bores and politicians, and you know, it makes us over reason, over critical, and our engine is always buzzing up there. But we tend to ignore the other parts of the system. So part of the unfoldment is to balance that, is to balance those poles and say, it's all one thing, you know, love, reason, logic, creativity, psychic ability, all that stuff is all one thing. It's all the same consciousness, but we're categorizing it into very distinct areas to operate at optimal capacity. That is, from a supreme state of equilibrium, where you're a very powerful and full human being. You have to have balance in all those areas. You can't just specialize in one of them and be like a love machine or a logic machine or a war machine. That's no good. You end up getting sick and creating this like psychic toxicity. So you have to be able to balance those out. And when you start to do that, everything suddenly gets a lot better. Your health gets better. Your social network becomes more aligned with what you want and who you are. You can achieve greater levels of focus. Everything in your life just kind of falls into place a little bit more. So knowing what the unfoldment is has very, very practical elements to it, not just the philosophy about how the universe is put together, from one perspective, at least from mine, but also what we do in our daily lives when we go to the bathroom, when we take the trash out, when we take the dog for a walk. Those things, if it's not relevant there, it's not relevant anywhere for me. So it has to be put into actual physical daily life.
Have you read The Secret?
Yeah.
The Four Agreements?
Yeah.
The Power of Now?
Yeah.
Do you resonate with these philosophies?
I like Tolle's.
He's here in Vancouver, eh?
Is he? Yeah, he is. That's right. He's up that neck of the woods with his lady friend, isn't he?
Yeah, Kitsilano. Yeah.
Yeah. I like Tolle's very, very simple modern interpretation of what really to me is Taoism, which is how to be. And he has found a way to be. I don't think it's the way, but he has found a very good way to be in the moment. And I've read both his main 3 works, Power and Now, Stillness Speaks, and New Earth. And I like what he has to say. And it's a bit suspect when he's on Oprah Winfrey and stuff. But to be honest, if she said, do you want to come on my show, Neil Kramer, and talk about your work? I would do, of course. You know, why not? Reach a new audience, great. Make a few quid, fantastic. You know, why not? So I think you have to go to the text and you have to listen to the man speak. And I think he's pretty good. Rhonda Byrne, a bit populist, a bit sensationalist, some real mechanics in what she's saying, but I think the trajectory of where it's being aimed at is a bit wrong for me. And Don Miguel Ruiz, again, very entry-level material, but really, really healthy stuff. And if anyone's found themselves in a difficult situation, his principles in the 4 agreements are going to help you get out of it and reach a point of stability. So entry-level, but really, really healthy.
The Unfoldment is a step above these?
Goodness me, I could possibly not answer that question.
Fair enough. I will scratch it. Is there
No, you can leave it in. What I'd say is the Unfoldment is a book that anyone can pick up and read, but I know that most of the people who've been following my work for the last few years expect a pretty deep experience. They don't want to piss about with surface principles. They want to go into something of substance, something juicy. They want a big, rare steak, yeah? They don't want tofu or whatever. And that's what I've tried to deliver with this. So, yeah, anybody could pick it up. My mum and your mum could pick this up and enjoy it and read it and think, wow, that's quite thought-provoking. I might have to go back and reread some bits of it. But, yeah, that's really interesting. Very respectfully written for a broad audience. People who have educated themselves in the esoteric will find deeper layers in it.
Remember, they like to be called women now.
Okay.
So we don't call them a broad audience. Mothers, anyway.
I get you. Very funny.
Neil, is there a common reality? We were talking about this during the break. My theory is that we all project a physical reality, and that's the Earth. What do you think about this?
There's this idea that Robert Anton Wilson popularized called reality tunnels. I don't know if you've ever come across that. Okay. He basically repackaged this philosophical idea called representative realism, which says that everybody's perception of the world is unique. And not only is it unique, but it's radically different to everybody else's. So much so that if you were to sort of teleport into my body, you would have a heart attack at the shock of how differently I see things, and vice versa. So would I in your body. And that, Robert Anton Wilson said, it was actually Timothy Leary who coined the term reality tunnel, but he said they are so unique that we're really moving in these little tunnels. We're tunneling together. And when you start to go into existence, you create your own unique, very, very separate tunnel, which is, absolutely your own experience. If you don't think and you don't make your own decisions and you don't engage with your own life, which many people don't, they do not do that in the slightest, then you find yourself drifting into a very traditional group reality tunnel, like I am a Republican or I am a Democrat, I am a Christian, I am a Jew, whatever. You find yourself defining yourself by traditional reality tunnels, which philosophically and spiritually are there for people who can't be bothered thinking, right? They're there for people who are too afraid to think. And at a very kind level, they're there for people who don't know that they can invent their own. So I think there are shared platforms, and certainly some governments and institutions purposefully try and create a reality tunnel and say, right, this is it, okay? This is it. There isn't any others. This is the one. And we've defined it so thoroughly because we made it and we can afford to do that. We can articulate every little characteristic of this reality tunnel, what things are, how they work, how they slot together, the mechanics. The clockwork has been intricately mapped out, and this is it. This is it. And they try and persuade us that their reality tunnel is the only way it can be. And that's part of the excitement of this unfoldment process, to laugh your balls off at how nonsensical, how silly that idea is, and then go about the business, which is quite another matter, of building your own reality tunnel based on your own journey and on the journeys of those who resonate with you.
Neil, where can people learn more about you? Do you have a website that people can go to?
Yeah, if you go to neilkramer.com, that's NeilKramer, Neil Kramer with a K.com. It interviews, essays, my book. You can link to Barnes & Noble and Amazon and lots of other places. There are DVDs. There's an audio book there as well from different essays from other works I've done. So events are there, teaching work that I get involved in, workshops, etc. neilkramer.com.
Parting shot.
I would say thank you for listening. If you are interested in philosophy or spirituality or the peculiar state of the world, I'm sure you will find something of interest in my book, The Unfoldment.
Neil Kramer, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Russell. I appreciate the opportunity, and it was good talking to you.
And thank you for being on The West Coast Truth.